events taking place on main campus. One of them is a great event that the library hosts every year, and it's called the Edible Book Festival. And if you haven't had a chance to get over to see some of the entries in the book, contest, the Edible Book Contest, please do so. It's taking place tomorrow on Thursday from 11 to 4 in Donnelly Library. And you'll see some really creative renditions of people translating their idea of their favorite book into something edible and delicious.
So come over to my house and see failed attempts that he's trying to make it that we had to throw out.
So
Brandon's
issued a blanket invitation to anybody who'd like to come over and see anything that didn't quite make it.
I like chocolate. That's what there's a recipe in there I've always wanted to try.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's an interesting taking a recipe from the book and making it
They
into a
just gave
visual.
the list of ingredients. That's what I what to do with it.
And so in addition to that, of course, we have many different events going on, but I've taken the liberty of planning your Saturday for you. So this will start off with a 5K on Saturday morning at 8 o'clock. So register on the NMNGfoundation.org website to be in the 5K. And then from there, you can make your way over to Kennedy to watch the parade and enjoy a breakfast burrito and a cup of coffee while you're relaxing there. And then if that wasn't enough to eat, then right after you see the parade go by, head over to the tailgate in the music building parking lot. We'll be having hamburgers and hot dogs, and this is all provided by the Alumni Association and the Alumni Board. And then this leads right into the football game on Saturday. So what could be better for homecoming? And with that, I would like to introduce our next speaker. I'm very pleased to introduce our next HU Talk presenter, Dr. Roxanne Gonzales. Dr. Gonzales is the Vice President of Academic Affairs and Provost at NMHU. She's passionate about the welfare of animals in our community, especially dogs, and is involved in the Animal Welfare Coalition of Northeast New Mexico, and has been at Highlands for 7 years. Plus, please welcome Dr. Gonzales as she presents her HU Talk on another type of veteran, or dogs and their history.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to just have the slides, so this will be kind of a presentation. I don't need to be on the screen. I want you to see the puppy dogs. They don't have dwarf kitty cats, so we won't be talking about cats. I will admit I'm more prone to dogs than I am cats, I hope you enjoy this. It's probably about 20 minutes. We'll have a video at the end that I would like to show, but I want to kind of get through a few things. Let's see. Why is this? Oh, here we go. For those of you who don't know, March 13th is the National Canine Veterans Day. So on March 13th every year, you should be thinking about going to the cemeteries, and there are veteran cemeteries in just about every state where you can go and lay a little doggy bone or pay your respects. And for those of you who don't know, you go to Albuquerque International Airport. When you walk up to the, I guess it's the second floor, when you look to the right, they're often where they have the balloon and all the low riders and stuff on that second before you go to the final floor to check in. There's a section of a wall, and most of those are dogs that work in the canines for first responders, but there's an honor wall of canines that have served, some of them in the military and some of them as first responders right there in the airport. Take the time to go look at all the puppy dogs over there. And again, there's no cats, and there's probably a reason why there are no pussy cats. So why this topic? For most of you who don't know me, I was raised with dogs. Remember my dad, he grew up in the South Valley, and I spent my first 5 or 6 years there. There are always dogs running around in the neighborhood, and my dad had German Shepherds, and my grandma's had all kinds of dogs, and we always had dogs when I was growing up. And I love having them around me. I prefer big dogs to little dogs. My husband and I have owned German Shepherds, Irish Wolfhounds, and a lot of other breeds. But at one point, when I was in college, I was in ROTC, and I wanted to become an officer in the military. And as I was looking at jobs that I could do, I actually started to look at wanting to be a pilot, but I was informed that women couldn't fly in those days. About 3 years later, they let women become pilots, but the other area I was looking at was security forces, because I wanted to be a dog handler. Well, you don't need to be an officer to be a dog handler. They want folks that are actually enlisted to do that. And to me, it's just an amazing thing to work with these animals who want to work. They have this energy and drive to do this work. And of course, Julie mentioned the AWC, the Animal Welfare Coalition. Since I've been here in Las Vegas, I've become very involved, and we have a lot of issues here within our own community in terms of ordinance, following our ordinances, sheltering, and that's a whole nother story. In fact, I did a shelter program a couple of years ago when we started these HHIs. But what really got me interested in this is my sister bought me a book called War Dogs, and it's actually going to be on the reference list of that. And it takes me forever to read books because I don't have a lot of time, but every night before I go to bed, I read probably about a chapter at a time. And finally got through this war book called War Dogs. And it was really intriguing about the history of how we got to where we are today with our animals. And I thought, what kind of a topic can I do for today? And I thought, well, this is really intriguing to me to find out how long we've been using them, how we use them, at least here in our country. I didn't go too far afield from our country, but that's how I came to the topic of today. So just so you have an idea, I did a chronology of some of the earliest uses of animals. Most of the time, again, it's been dogs. We do see horses are often used, and mules, and they're usually used for, mules are used for carrying things, and horses for obviously as part of the battleground. But dogs have been used quite a bit over history. You'll see that the earliest documented is in Tibet, and it was a mastiff type of dog. If you know what a mastiff is, they're big, burly, very muscular animals that drool a lot. If you don't know what a mastiff is, think of that Tom Hanks movie. What was it called? Hutch, Turner and Hooch. Turner and Hooch. That's a mastiff. They're big dogs. And you'll see that they actually were using dogs to attack groups. Most of the time they were used as sentinels, though, kind of just keep an eye. That's sort of the first thing people began to realize. Even when we think about our ancient man, dogs became kind of their sentries watching the camps at night. But I think it's kind of interesting that the British in Jamaica during the Maroon War, they took 100 dogs and made them savages so that they could attack the savages on that island and just, destroy them and cause injury. So you'll see that the transition as we get into the Civil War, we used them a lot as messengers. And the reason they were used as messengers is because a lot of people at that time, really, the soldiers didn't realize that they were being used. There was dogs running around everywhere, and they could actually cross into lines. And it started with World War I. We really started seeing the usage of dogs in a much more organized and familiar pattern when they're using the dogs to bring medical supplies to the injured in the field. So as we get into World War II, there began to be kind of a group of people kind of going, how can we use the dogs? How can we use these animals to help us with our campaigns overseas? And there was a group called Dogs for Defense. This was actually developed by a woman who went to a colonel and said, you know what, we really can use these dogs. We can use them as sentries. We can use them for all kinds of training. We can use them for medical reasons. And there was an organization called Dogs for Defense. And that actually became the first start. And that group's job was to call out to the civilian sector to do a marketing campaign, if you will, to bring dogs to work for the military. And they had this full campaign where they would put posters up. If you recall, when you see things from World War II, they did the tire collections. Well, it was kind of, let's get a dog. You can donate your dog for service in the military. And officially became the Canine Corps of the Army, is the ones who actually took it over in 1942. And you'll notice the date, March 13, that's probably why that is the National Veterans Dog Day. But the first group that really started to organize was a group out of Poughkeepsie, New York, a munitions manufacturing company. They started to use the dogs as sentries to watch over the properties to make sure that they weren't being, invaded. And of course, we weren't at that point getting anybody coming in, but we worried a lot about spies back then. And so we wanted to make sure that our equipment and our companies were not being infiltrated. So the first thing that really sort of begins to happen is they decided to bring in over 200 dogs to train them at private kennels. So when if you buy your dog from an AKC breeder, for example, you would go to a private kennel. And so this Dogs for Defense would go around not only seeking regular old puppy dogs from the civilians, but they would also go to private breeders and say, hey, you're breeding German Shepherds. We'd really like to see if you could donate a few of your dogs for our cause to be able to work with the military. And the problem was when they started to train these animals is really nobody knew what to do. They really didn't have any kind of organized model or method of training other than what we normally do for our regular puppy dogs and pussycats at home. And it didn't do very well. There was no methodology. Nobody had really thought about how to do this. So in that first group of 200, very few dogs were actually making any kind of progress. So they kind of stepped back and decided to take another look. And they said, well, what else can we use these dogs for to have a little more sort of a little more training? So we know at that point that we were using sled dogs. And so they used the sled dogs, especially overseas, to do medical rescues. So they were able to train those dogs and then decided to do the patrol again and the messenger service. Those were a lot easier to train. And they started to put together some formal training. You'll see in a few minutes, they actually created anybody who's been in the military knows that you have a technical manual for everything. A technical manual on how to clean this gun, a technical manual on how to repair, remove and replace an aircraft maintenance component on an airplane. And so it became the Canine Corps. It came out of the Army Remount Branch. And the Dogs for Defense, their main job for this particular branch was to focus on getting dogs. They were the logistics branch of getting the dogs, if you will. So they decided to go ahead and set up processing centers. We had 4 or 5 major processing centers across the country. And the volunteers came in, just kind of like this weekend, we did a shot clinic here in town. The volunteers processed the dogs, checked them in, and then the vets did the final immunization of the animals. So the volunteers got all the dogs. And once they were finally approved by the vet to be part of that Canine Corps, they were quarantined for 21 days and they had a tattoo in their ear. So a lot was going on at the doggy front, if you will. And there was this interesting fellow who was a SWIFT officer who lived in Santa Fe at the time, Walter Andre. And he was kind of an eccentric fellow. He had this idea that he could take a group of dogs and train them to attack and kill. So when you think of, when you see the canine with the the police and you see the military, first thing that I think of is, they have their big garbs on and they've got the attack dogs trained. So he came up with this notion and convinced the War Department in 1942 that he could take a group of dogs and train them to attack and kill and cause total disruption on the battlefield. That he could take 2 or 3 dogs, cause a disruption over here while the Army does what it's supposed to do over here on this side over here, and it would be the distraction. The War Department supported the effort. They decided to go ahead and give him a lot of money. What I find amusing is the island that was targeted to do this was Cat Island. It's the only time we see cats involved over in Gulfport, Mississippi. And this is really beginning to happen when we think about this time frame. This is really related to what was going on in the Pacific. And the reason they chose this location in Gulfport, Mississippi, was that the climate was very much like what it was in the Pacific, hot, humid, damp. So they got 10 dogs of each of these breeds. Greyhounds, Irish and Russian wolfhounds, staghounds, Airedales, German shepherds, mastiffs, schnauzers, and foxhounds. The piece that I found really interesting in this particular chapter was this gentleman, as I said, was eccentric, and I think he was a little off base mentally. He wanted to use live bait and actually have the animals, the dogs, learn not only to attack, but to actually kill. And he said the best individuals for these live bait would be the prisoners that we had, along with any kind of aliens that were not supposed to be in the United States at that time when they were doing the training. The problem he had is he had an extremely abusive training methodology. He did not think about positive reinforcement, didn't do treats. He did a lot of abuse. He would withhold food and water from the animals, continual beatings. Well, guess what happened? It didn't work. They pulled the program after about 6 months, and they decided that there was something a little off kilter with him, and they ended up putting him on permanent surveillance. And I don't know what his end of life was. I've been thinking it'd be kind of fun to go back and look this up and see if his family still remained in Santa Fe or what ended up happening, but they pulled the program. And part of the reason it didn't work was because the dogs were not being trained in a manner that rewarded them. Anybody who has dogs knows they want to please. They want to be, they want to make their master happy. These are some pictures you'll see up here in the top. This is the woman who started this Dogs for Defense. I love this picture down here on the right. You'll see the soldier with the young little boy, you know, the 10 or 11-year-old bringing his dog, donating his Doberman for the cause, for the war. And they didn't accept a lot. They took a lot of the dogs, and those that didn't match, they actually gave the dogs back. And in the middle, so all of these rows here, those are kennels. If you look at the size of those kennels, they're small crates. Think about this on Cat Island. The dog can barely stand up. The dog can barely sit down. Kennel standards for today at our shelters and our medical facilities. The animal needs to be able to stand up, completely turn around, and be able to stretch out completely one end to the other in all ways. So these were not wonderful living conditions for these poor puppy dogs. So let's move forward a little bit. During Vietnam, 4,000 dogs served, 200 made it back to the US. Now that doesn't mean they were all killed in action, but a lot of them were, it's the first time we've really used them as a supplement to the war game, if you will. They were considered equipment. So rather than packing them up with the tanks and the helicopters, they just let them go, or they would take them and give them to the South Vietnamese police departments and the military. We did not pay to bring them back. It was just not something that we did because they were just surplus. And I guess if you had surplus bedding, you just leave it there instead of trying to bring it back. That in and of itself really changed the laws of how we think about our animals. I saw a lot of that during Iraq and Afghanistan. There's now a law that allows people here in the US or the handlers to adopt their own dogs. So you're not having to leave them behind. And what we did see during Iraq and Afghanistan is a lot of units would actually adopt a dog, but it wasn't a military working dog. It's kind of like the mascot of the unit. And so people would try to bring their dogs back. And many times they were very successful. So today we use these dogs. We all know that dogs have a great sense of smell. We use them for IEDs, for drugs, and we use them for illnesses as well. And their interesting thing that I discovered is that we get 80 to 90% of our dogs from Europe. They're not internally bred here in the US. We don't produce our own dogs. We get them from external sources. So during Vietnam, there were 1,600 dogs on the front lines. And again, just to remind you, March 13th, Canine National Dog Day, that's going to be on the test at the end. So how did they get, so where did we get to where we are today for dog source? And as I mentioned, we had the Dogs for Defense. Donors would get a certificate saying, thank you. It was a real pretty certificate for donating your dog. And they would get trained, and they did go, the Department of Defense finally decided on the kinds of breeds that they wanted, and they would go to top breeders for those dogs. And they actually made sure that the dogs were fit, and it wasn't just that they were fit, they had to have a right temperament. And usually, if you watch a few things today, you'll see that they sort of take the dogs in the first 6 months and they give them to a foster home. And they get socialized in that first 6 months. And then after that, then they put them into the kind of training that they're going to be doing. So you'll see that only 13% are born and bred within the military. I put a little note there, kind of like our military brats, of which I am. So, but you'll see that they have to have certain traits, and this is not just for our military use. This is also for anything that we use with our first responders. My cousin has a friend who's raises rescue dogs, and her dogs actually have 2 dogs that actually worked 9/11. They have to have very specific traits, and you treat them like family members, but to a point. They have to be very, very focused. And once they graduate, they go into active duty. And initially, they had 32 dogs breeds that they were doing, and these are the breeds that are right now. And I'm not going to read it to you, you can see it on the screen. But these are the most common breeds that they recruit today. And some of them are used for different types of things. I think when we think of, if I were to ask you right now, what dog do you think does most of the IED work? You're going to see the German Shepherd and the Belgian Malinois. You don't see the Airedale out there, but all the dogs are used for different types of things. Once you, just like if you're in the military and you retire, the animals get TRICARE for life. Once they're with the military, they have lifelong medical care. But you'll see a couple of pictures here. This one I love is one of the first early portraits of a Red Cross dog that was used. They used the dogs to take gas masks out to individuals in the field. The one on the right is actually helping an individual that's on the field that needs care. One of the things they used to use the dogs for as well for medical was if the dogs would go out and find someone that had been killed on the field, they would just leave that person there. If the dog found somebody who was still alive, the dog would actually lay next to that soldier, that wounded individual, and wait until somebody came and helped them medically. So they could tell the difference between somebody who had survived on the battlefield and one who did not. So I want to talk a little bit about our heroes. Animals can't get official military medals, but we have nonprofit organizations that actually do award. Initially, there was some dogs that got some official high-level awards, but they were stripped of their awards because they were doggies. If they were cats, they probably would have been double stripped. But let's talk about some of our heroes. This is one of the first ones that we really get to see. Her name is Sally. She was with the 11th Pennsylvania Infantry, and she died of a bullet. But the bottom line is she was quite important to that particular unit. She was used as a sentry, but also helped protect on the field. Chips was one of those dogs. He got the Silver Star, which is an extremely high military medal, a Service Cross, which is a very important medal, and the Purple Heart for injuries. And this was awarded by the unit who had Chips. And you know, if you watch some of these doggy movies, there's always a colonel or a major who hates dogs, and that's what happened here. There was a colonel who said, "This is an animal. There's no reason why this animal should even get a medal. They're dispensable." So he stripped him of his medals, but he was awarded, and eventually he actually got the Dickon Medal, which was from one of these nonprofit groups to honor and recognize the work that this puppy dog did. Stubby, I love this name for this guy, Stubby. Was used over in Europe during World War II, and he protected the soldiers. What I love here is he had this notion where he could somehow detect that there was gas attacks coming and would notify the folks on the field as well as back at the units that there was something going on. He actually did receive a rank, sergeant. Now, we do give animals ranks now. It's kind of interesting. They do get, depending on the service, private first class, you know, I don't know my Navy ranks very well, but they do get Air Force and Army and Marine Corps ranks. Right, I won't give them medals, it's beyond me, but, and you can see he's got all of his medals, like a retired soldier. He's got all his medals on his mess dress vest. Luca, you may have actually heard about Luca. There's a couple of movies made about Luca. I actually read a book about her. She is a EOD dog detection, explosive ordnance disposal dog. She was out there doing deployments, was able to work with her handler, and you know, if you sort of follow the things with Iraq and Afghanistan, there were so many dogs that were lost for this kind of duty. This is what they were heavily used for in Iraq and Afghanistan. But Luca did a great job, and she is an animal of valor, and there's a movie about her as well. And here we have something that's a different breed. We've got the lab, Gabe. And Gabe, as you can see, does work today with sort of a marketing campaign, if you will. And I think that's one of the things that a lot of people do with their dogs once they retire. They use them for marketing, for the services, for raising dogs for different things beyond the military. Here's some references. This story here of Luca is a really good one. This is the book I was referring to. Very good book. This is a great story here, The Dog Who Could Fly. It's a story about, I think it's World War I, a gentleman who was in the Netherlands, or was in Belgium, and his plane had crashed, and major campaign going on. I want to say the Battle of Bulge. Was that Belgium? I think it was, but anyway, he finds this little puppy group in a house that had been demolished, and he adopts one of these dogs. And this dog becomes his companion in flight. It's a great story. But there's a bunch of video links here. I think what's interesting to me is there's one that came out a couple of years ago with Tatum. Yeah, whatever his name is, the dancer guy. It was supposed to be a comedy, but it really wasn't. It was a story about his PTSD and his buddy's PTSD. And it's really quite an intriguing story, because we forget that dogs.
Yeah,
Oh, you're actually.
I'm on Zoom.
The woman I talked about whose animals worked at 9/11, after 9/11, a year after, one of her dogs just died of depression.
Do you want to talk to me?
Somebody's got to, could you mute your mic, please? Just turn her off. Okay. So quickly, any questions? And then I've got a 7-minute video. And I'm not an expert on this. I just thought it was really intriguing to share what I discovered. Julie.
Why no corgis and no shelties?
Shelties make too much brushing, so the units have to get something done.
Well, I don't know. You've had shepherds, let me tell you. I got one that's got 2 layers, and I can't, she's going through a bit right now, a pre-winter coat. You know, that's a good question, because corgis with their short little legs, they have a very specific mission. You know, they get into the burrows. Same thing with the little terriers. You know, they got the little legs to get in there and get the rats out. But I don't know.
Might be too distracting.
Well, you know, and I think the piece is that when you look at the breeds of the people they typically use, their larger breeds. It might be easier. I have no idea, but it might be easier to track them. I do know that certain breeds have more ability to be trained and than others. What I thought was interesting, there's no poodles on there. Poodles are very good, are easy to train, but they don't do poodles.
They don't shed.
And they don't shed. Oh my gosh, I can't even tell you how often we've been vacuuming this.
I would say, I'm not sure, maybe you're familiar with Rebel, the dog at Texas A&M. That's one of the key, it's corporate, it's a cadet. It runs its own company, the E2, and it's called a mascot company.
Okay,
And they've had them since 1931, multiple of the same dog. They bury the dog there. It's the only animal on campus that's allowed in any building. It's very much part of the A&M cadet life.
Yeah.
Which is a big part of the university.
well, you know, my dad flew in Vietnam, overseas in Guam and Curacao and a few other places. And what I will say is that mascots with units in wartime are really very important to help keep the morale up. And that's one of the things that I think as I read through the book, it's one of the things that got people thinking about using dogs with the military units initially. You know, they could use them as sentries, but they also found that one of the things they did was they brought the morale of the soldiers and you know, all the airmen who on the fronts. It helped keep their morale up, and that's this dog who could fly. It's a real fun read, and one of the reasons this is one of those areas where the major didn't want it because of the dog and blah 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 blah. But one of the things that this dog did was the unit, the flying squadron, really embraced this dog and kept the morale up. And the dog was just such a part of it that they fought for him to be able to stay within that unit when it would transfer from one location to the other in Europe. But other questions? Is there anything online?
Not so far.
Okay. So I have a video that's about 7 minutes that I would like to show you, but I do want to caution for anybody who is concerned. This is going to have some scenes from Afghanistan with IED explosions. So I left this for last, but it's a really nice sort of tale about companionship, how a soldier uses their dog, how they become friends, and what happens in the long run with these animals and how they're used. But I do want to give that caution. So if you think that this might be disturbing, I'm very cognizant of that for military, or doesn't have to be military. If you're a first responder, you just never know. So I'm going to show this video. Hopefully it will work. We seem to have a problem. We're going to try to get
It
the
could be
audio.
when share screen, you have to click the little button.
Yep.
So
Oh, share sound. I just learned something new. Thank you. I don't know what I need to do. Yeah, let's go back so people can hear this stuff.
In 2011, Staff Sergeant Ben Siegel and his wingman Charlie deployed to Afghanistan from Seymour Johnson Air Force Base, North Carolina. Their main missions were bomb detection and base security, but they were also qualified for patrols outside the wire.
It was, the weather was bad. It rained the night before, so there was a little bit of water on the ground, which is always kind of a concern for explosive teams, as any kind of moisture on the ground can dissipate explosive odor, so it makes our job a little bit more difficult.
The job is to look for danger and hope you don't find it. But on May 8th, they did.
Things are going well. No incident. We got, I would say max 2 clicks away from the base on a route, and then all of a sudden, just kind of out of nowhere, everything kind of just went crazy. There was a very loud explosion. It just seemed like it was right on top of us, off to our left and behind us. And it was at that moment that I knew that something had gone wrong.
The blast was from an improvised explosive device. The IED had wounded a member of the patrol, and the mission was called off. But Sergeant Siegel's team was operating far forward and separated from the rest of the unit, so they chose an alternate route back to base, one that would allow them to avoid the potentially dangerous area of the explosion, but would also prevent the foreman and Charlie from rejoining the rest of the squad.
And we made it back to within sight of the T-walls at the installation, so we thought we were pretty much home free. So down they went, 1, 2, 3, went across, and they set up on the opposite end. Then it was my turn to go. So took one last look behind me, slung my rifle kind of across my chest, turned around, and I think I took maybe 1 or 2 steps, and just the whole ground underneath me just... I remember getting, tossed up in the air, probably about 1,000 feet. It was probably only about 3 or 4. Hit the ground. It was kind of like this sickening, like thudding sound. It's like you felt it, but you heard it. First thought, right off the bat, where's my rifle? It's right here on my chest. Now it's gone. So I start trying to find it. So I thought I saw it, and I started moving towards it. And then I realized that Charlie wasn't there. He was gone. He was tethered to me by a leash. The leash was cut. So I'm looking for the gun. I'm calling for the dog. Probably looked all kinds of ridiculous. And I remember one of the guys who was with us jumped down to where I was in this little crater, if you will. And I guess I wasn't listening. So he kind of hit me on the side of my helmet and told me I needed to be still. He said, "Hey Ben, you got some problems."
The explosion had taken away more than just Ben's rifle. It had removed his leg from the mid-shin down. His teammates used their combat life-saving skills to staunch the bleeding and keep Ben alive. But what about Charlie?
For the life of me, I have no idea how he survived. The only thing that I can think of after the fact is that we were kind of on the side of a hill, or a slope, if you will, gradual slope, and he was just a little bit higher in an elevation than I was. And I think he was just kind of on the outside of the blast. He was a couple feet away from me because I gave him a little bit of leash.
The first injured airman was on the squad's only litter, so Ben Siegel, loaded down with combat gear and missing a leg, would walk back to base.
They got me up on my right leg was still pretty good. It was chewed up a little bit and burned by shrapnel. So I had an airman on each side, threw my arm up over their shoulder, and we kind of hop, skipped, and jumped as best we could back to the ECP.
Charlie, with 2 blown eardrums and a hind quarter full of shrapnel, would walk with them.
And the first time that I saw him again was when I woke up in the hospital room after my first surgery in Bagram. They brought him in, and Charlie was not a cuddly dog. He was not very emotional. He's not the dog that runs to you when you get home and jumps up on you, puts his paws on your shoulders. It's not him. Very subtle with his affection. But that day he came in and he's pulling at the leash and he's dragging the handler across the room, and he jumped up. He kind of laid down next to me, panting and fussing a bit. So I knew that he was happy to see me.
Most airmen, after losing a limb, would put aside the uniform. Not Ben Siegel. He would spend the next 5 months healing, and then learning to walk, and then learning to run. And when he remastered those skills, he decided to remaster another.
And I went from Walter Reed back to Seymour Johnson Air Force Base in North Carolina, 4th Fighter Wing, which is where I was stationed at the time. And I knew that when I got back, because I could walk at this point, I could run, but I didn't know if I was going to be able to handle dogs. So I asked, if I could get put back in the kennels, and they said yes.
And of course, he had an old friend to help him on his journey.
So Charlie, we actually paired back up. So he was with me for my recovery. So I used him as my test dummy for my re-education, if you will, into dog handling. And we actually recertified as a certified bomb team a couple of months after I got back and went right back to work.
Staff Sergeant Siegel would eventually pin on new ranks, move to new bases, and take on new missions. The young Staff Sergeant who lost his leg in Afghanistan is now a Senior Master Sergeant, one who was recognized in 2020 as the best First Sergeant on Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. But his partnership with Charlie continued even after he left the kennels.
So he was older, so it came time for him to retire. So when he retired, we took him home. And then when I came home, he would follow me everywhere I went. Everywhere. If I got up, he moved. When I sit down, he would sit down. Wherever I was, he was between me and everything else. That's where he felt he needed to be. He needed to be between me and, you know, danger, if you will.
The duo of Ben and Charlie eventually came to an end. Charlie passed away in 2015. He was laid to rest where he had learned to be an airman, the kennels of Lackland Air Force Base in Texas. But his master, his friend, his wingman, still has a soft spot for a salty old dog.
When he did something, or when he said something in his way, it meant something. It wasn't flippant, and he didn't give it to anybody else.
Well, thank you very much for attending. These will be posted later and you'll have all those references. The American Kennel Club has a really great site about war dogs. The Department of Defense has a wonderful site, and actually that's where I got this particular video. So there are a lot of great sites out there if you're at all interested, and they do adopt out these dogs when they're done with their careers. Used to be when I was a kid, I remember they used to say, oh no, you can't adopt those dogs, they're too violent and vicious. And that's not the case anymore. They're always looking for good homes to take these dogs once they're done with their active duty, so they can have a wonderful life in their last few years. So thank you so much for attending, and enjoy the rest of the talks, and go Cowboys, Cowgirls on Friday.
Thank you, Dr. Gonzales. Good morning, everyone. We are on day 3 of our fantastic HG talks. I'm Nicole, and this morning I have the pleasure to introduce you to Dr. Nina Pavizia. She is currently